Welcome to Karen Universe, where we dive into every wild, quirky, and intriguing story out there. When the HOA banned the snowblower at night, I started up at 5 a.m. The noise at dawn wake up the entire neighborhood. One neighbor became at started an argument and called the police. Stay with me, and what happens next is truly unexpected.
At 4:58 a.m., while the neighborhood still slept under a thick blanket of fresh snow, I stood in my driveway staring at a printed HOA notice that had ruined my entire week. It was taped to my mailbox like a threat, bold letters screaming that snowblowers were banned after 8 p.m., effective immediately. No exceptions. No warnings. Just fines. What the notice didn't say was how early was too early, and in that silence, an idea began to form, sharp and cold as the wind cutting across my street. I live in a place where winter isn't decorative. Snow doesn't gently fall, it attacks. Driveways vanish overnight, sidewalks become traps, and if you don't clear early, you don't leave at all. The night before, the storm dumped nearly a foot of snow, the kind that laughs at shovels. I got home late, exhausted, knowing I'd be up early. But the HOA had decided noise mattered more than reality, and they'd made sure everyone knew. I tried to be reasonable. I reread the rules. After 8 p.m. was forbidden. Before. Technically allowed. No quiet hours mentioned. No decibel limits. Just a smug assumption that residents would use common sense. Common sense, apparently, was subjective. And subjectivity is dangerous when power-hungry neighbors are involved. By 4:59 a.m., my phone buzzed with a work reminder. I had to leave by 6. I looked down the street at identical houses, identical mailboxes, identical obedience. That's when the frustration boiled over into something else. Not rage. Resolve. If they wanted silence at night, fine. I'd give them noise at dawn. At exactly 5 a.m., I wheeled my snowblower out like a weapon. The engine roared to life, ripping through the quiet so violently that porch lights snapped on up and down the block. Curtains twitched. A dog started barking. Snow flew in bright arcs under the streetlights, and with every pass, I felt lighter. I wasn't just clearing my driveway. I was making a point. And I had no idea that within minutes, my little act of compliance would trigger a chain reaction that would wake the entire neighborhood, summon the HOA, and turn an ordinary winter morning into open warfare. At that moment, I believed I was alone, but the snowblower echoed farther than I imagined. Windows opened. Phones lifted. Complaints drafted themselves in real time. Somewhere, a board member was already reaching for a clipboard, convinced rules were being broken. They were wrong, technically, but technicalities don't calm egos. I kept pushing forward, unaware this morning would change how everyone saw me forever. It was only the beginning, and consequences were lining up faster than the snow could fall around us before sunrise hit. By 5:07 a.m., the street no longer belonged to sleep. The snowblower's growl bounced off houses like an alarm nobody could shut off. I watched shadows move behind windows as I worked, pretending not to notice the attention. Snow sprayed against parked cars, fences, and perfectly matched HOA-approved shrubs. The cold air burned my lungs, but adrenaline kept me warm. This wasn't just about clearing a path anymore. It had become a statement in motion. The first sign of trouble came when Mrs. Halvorson's porch light flicked on and stayed on. She lived 3 houses down and chaired the HOA's Community Harmony Committee, which was ironic because she thrived on conflict. I could almost picture her standing there in her robe, arms crossed, lips tight, mentally drafting an email titled "Unacceptable Behavior." I waved cheerfully as I passed her driveway. She did not wave back. At 5:12, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I ignored it. At 5:13, it buzzed again. I shut off the snowblower just long enough to check the screen. A group message from the HOA board lit up my notifications like fireworks. "Are you aware of the noise you are creating?" one text read. Another followed immediately, "This is highly inappropriate behavior." I smiled. Inappropriate wasn't the same as illegal. I restarted the engine and continued. If they wanted a conversation, they could come outside like adults. Within minutes, doors began opening. A man in slippers stepped onto his porch, shielding his eyes from the snow spray. Across the street, a woman filmed me with her phone, narrating under her breath. Someone shouted something I couldn't hear over the engine, but the tone was unmistakably angry. By 5:20 a.m., the street looked like a crime scene. Snowbanks piled high, tire tracks crisscrossed, and half the block stood outside, unified not by community spirit, but by shared irritation. I finished my driveway and moved to the sidewalk, carefully clearing only my assigned section. No extra help. No favors. Just compliance. That's when Mr. Collins, the HOA vice president, marched toward me. He was wearing a jacket over pajamas, his face red with cold and fury. He waved his phone in the air like evidence. I shut off the snowblower again, meeting him halfway. He opened his mouth to speak, but before he could, I pointed to the notice taped to my mailbox. After 8 p.m., I said calmly. It's 5:08 a.m. He froze, eyes darting to the paper, then back to me. Around us, neighbors leaned in, sensing something shift. This wasn't the confrontation he expected. The rules, his rules, were suddenly working against him. And that realization spread through the crowd like a crack in ice, quiet at first, but dangerous once it starts. For a moment, no one spoke. The snowblower idled beside me, rumbling softly like it was enjoying the tension. Mr. Collins stared at the notice, his jaw tightening as he realized the problem wasn't me. It was the wording. The exact wording he'd helped approve just 2 days earlier. Around us, neighbors exchanged looks, the kind that silently ask, "Wait, is he actually right?" Mrs. Halvorsen finally stepped off her porch and joined us, clutching her phone like a badge. "This is disturbing the peace," she snapped, pointing at the street as if peace were a fragile object I'd dropped. "People are sleeping." "I'm sure they were," I replied, keeping my voice even. "But the rule says after 8 p.m. Nothing about mornings." I checked twice. That's when murmurs started. Low, confused, irritated murmurs. Someone behind me said, "He's not wrong." Another voice followed, louder, "Then why did they write it like that?" The crowd's anger began to split, no longer aimed solely at me. Mr. Collins cleared his throat and tried to regain control. "This is clearly against the spirit of the rule," he said. "Common courtesy isn't enforceable," I cut in, holding up the paper again. "Only what's written is." That stung him. HOA authority thrives on vague language and unspoken pressure. Strip that away, and all that's left is paper and embarrassment. He glanced around, realizing he didn't have the upper hand anymore. Phones were still recording. Porch lights still blazed. This wasn't a private scolding, it was a public lesson. At 5:27 a.m., someone laughed. Not loudly, but enough to break the tension. Then another person chuckled. Mrs. Halvorsen shot them a glare, but it was too late. The mood had shifted. What started as collective annoyance was slowly becoming something else. Amusement. Maybe even approval. I turned the snowblower back on without asking permission. The engine roared, and instead of shouting, people stepped back. Some shook their heads. One neighbor gave me a subtle thumbs up before retreating inside. I finished the sidewalk and shut the machine down for good. My job was done. As I wheeled it back into the garage, My phone exploded with notifications. Private messages this time. Legend. HOA played themselves. Wish I'd thought of that. But mixed in were warnings too. They won't let this go. Expect fines. Board meeting incoming. Mr. Collins announced, loudly, that the HOA would be reviewing this incident. He said it like a threat. Mrs. Halvorsen nodded aggressively beside him. They retreated together, already rewriting the story in their heads where they were victims and I was the villain. I went inside, poured coffee, and watched the sky lighten through the window. I knew this wasn't over. Not even close. The rule might have protected me this morning, but the HOA hated nothing more than being outsmarted. And when they feel embarrassed, they don't cool down. They escalate. By the time the sun fully rose, the neighborhood had split into camps. Some people waved at me like I'd done something heroic. Others avoided eye contact entirely, as if rebellion were contagious. I went about my morning routine pretending everything was normal, but the tension sat heavy in the air. I knew the HOA wouldn't respond emotionally in public. They preferred paperwork. Quiet, suffocating paperwork. At 9:14 a.m., it arrived. An official email marked urgent, noise violation review landed in my inbox. The subject line alone made me laugh. I opened it slowly, savoring the moment. The message was long, formal, and clearly written by committee. It claimed my actions were intentionally disruptive, contrary to community values, and subject to penalty pending review. No fine amount listed. No rule cited. Just a promise that consequences were coming. I replied with one sentence and an attachment. Please see attached HOA notice dated earlier this week. Nothing else. No sarcasm. No explanation. Silence is louder when the facts are on your side. Around noon, my doorbell rang. It was Mr. Collins again, this time fully dressed, clipboard in hand, trying to look official. Mrs. Halvorsen stood a step behind him, arms folded so tightly it looked painful. I didn't invite them in. We talked on the porch, where half the street could see us if they wanted. They tried a different tactic now. Calm voices. Reasonable tones. We understand your frustration, Collins said. But surely you can see how this affected others. I can, I said. I can also see how banning snow removal at night affects people who work late. That's why wording matters. Mrs. Halvorsen jumped in. We're considering amending the rule retroactively. That's when I smiled. You can't, I said. That's not how rules work. Especially not yours. Her face tightened. She hadn't expected resistance backed by knowledge. I'd read the bylaws. All of them. Retroactive enforcement was explicitly forbidden. They knew it too. Collins glanced at her, annoyed. They left without resolution, promising a board meeting that evening. By 3 p.m., flyers appeared on doors announcing an emergency HOA session. The neighborhood buzzed. Group chats lit up. People were invested now, not just annoyed. This had become entertainment. At 6:30 p.m., the meeting room was packed. I sat quietly in the back as the board fumbled through explanations. When public comments opened, neighbors spoke up. Not all for me, but many against the rule. Stories poured out. Nurses. Delivery drivers. Parents with early shifts. The ban had hurt more people than the HOA realized. By the time my turn came, the room was already leaning my way. I stood, spoke plainly, and sat back down. No theatrics. Just facts. And for the first time, the HOA looked nervous. They weren't controlling the narrative anymore. The neighborhood was. The meeting ended without a vote, which told me everything I needed to know. HOAs love decisions. They hate uncertainty. When the board members filed out that night, avoiding eye contact and whispering among themselves. I knew they were scrambling. Power looks confident when it's unchallenged. The moment it's questioned, it starts to wobble. The next morning, a revised notice appeared on the community portal. The snowblower rule had been updated. Quiet hours were now listed as 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. clear. Specific. Too specific. It was damage control disguised as improvement. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of the chaos they'd caused, just a bland statement about maintaining harmony. But harmony was already gone. Neighbors stopped me during walks to talk. Some thanked me quietly. Others openly laughed about the morning I won on a technicality. A few admitted they'd been scared to push back before, afraid of fines or letters. What surprised me most was how many people had stories. Parking rules. Trash can violations. Paint color warnings. Everyone had felt the pressure, but no one wanted to be first to challenge it. That changed when the fines started showing up. Not for me. For others. Within days, the HOA began aggressively enforcing minor infractions. A car parked an inch over the line. A trash bin left out 30 minutes too long. It was retaliation, thinly veiled. The board couldn't punish me directly, so they reminded everyone else who was in charge. That's when the neighborhood chat exploded. Screenshots of violation notices flooded in. Anger replaced humor. People compared dates and realized something ugly. Enforcement had spiked immediately after the snowblower incident. This wasn't about rules. It was about control. Someone suggested organizing. Someone else mentioned bylaws. Another neighbor posted a link to state HOA regulations. The chat turned from venting to planning in less than an hour. I didn't lead it. I didn't need to. Momentum had its own engine. By the end of the week, a petition circulated demanding transparency, an audit of fines, and a recall vote for 2 board members. Names filled the document faster than I expected. Even people who'd glared at me that morning signed. Fear had shifted sides. The HOA responded with another email, warning against hostile behavior and false narratives. It only made things worse. People don't like being told they're imagining patterns when receipts exist. Late one night, I stood in my driveway again, snow long gone, thinking about how small actions can ripple. I hadn't planned a revolt. I just needed to get to work. But rules written without empathy eventually meet reality, and reality pushes back. The fight wasn't over yet. In fact, it was about to get louder. Not with engines this time, but with votes, meetings, and something HOAs fear more than noise. Unity. The recall meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday night, 2 weeks after the snowblower morning, and the tension was thick before anyone even spoke. The HOA board tried to frame it as a routine discussion, but nobody was fooled. Folding chairs filled the room wall to wall. People who had never attended a single meeting in years showed up early, arms crossed, papers in hand, ready. Mr. Collins opened with a rehearsed speech about community order and respecting structure. He talked for 10 minutes without actually saying anything, hoping boredom would save him. It didn't. Every sentence sounded hollow now. Once people see behind the curtain, the magic doesn't work again. Public comments hit hard. One neighbor described being fined while at a funeral. Another talked about a warning issued while she was hospitalized. A retired man admitted he'd paid unjust fines for years just to avoid conflict. The room shifted from frustration to something sharper. Accountability. When Mrs. Halvorsen spoke, it only poured fuel on the fire. She blamed misinterpretations and bad actors, glancing briefly in my direction. That was a mistake. Murmurs turned into open groans. Someone laughed out loud. Authority hates laughter more than anger. Then the legal question came up. A younger neighbor, a paralegal, stood and calmly cited state HOA statutes. Sections Subsections. Requirements the board had ignored. Proper notice. Consistent enforcement. Non-retaliation clauses. You could see the realization land on the board members' faces in real time. This wasn't just about embarrassment anymore. This was about liability. The vote happened faster than anyone expected. 2 board members were recalled. 1 resigned on the spot. Mr. Collins kept his seat by a narrow margin, but the confidence was gone. He looked smaller somehow, like the title no longer fit him properly. Afterward, people lingered in the parking lot, talking in clusters. It felt less like a victory lap and more like relief. Something oppressive had lifted. Strangers introduced themselves. Phone numbers were exchanged. Community, the thing the HOA claimed to protect, actually showed up once the fear receded. A temporary committee was formed to review rules. Volunteers stepped up. Transparency was promised, and for the first time, it didn't sound like a lie. I was asked to join. I declined. This had never been about control for me. Just fairness. As I drove home, I passed quiet streets, orderly and calm, the way the HOA always claimed it wanted. But now it felt earned, not enforced. That difference mattered. Later that night, my phone buzzed with one final message from an unknown number. Next snowfall, it read, "We're all plowing at 5 a.m. I smiled, knowing winter would come again. And when it did, the neighborhood would be ready. Not just with machines, but with backbone. Winter returned a month later, quietly at first, like it was testing the neighborhood. Light snow dusted roofs and cars overnight, nothing dramatic, but enough to bring back memories of that morning. I woke before my alarm, half expecting tension, half expecting nothing at all. The rule change had settled things on paper, but culture takes longer to shift than bylaws. At 4:45 a.m., I looked out the window and noticed something strange. Porch lights were on. Not 1 or 2, but many. Down the street, garage doors cracked open. A low mechanical hum floated through the cold air, faint but unmistakable. Someone had already started clearing snow. By 5 a.m., it was happening everywhere. Snowblowers roared to life in unplanned unison, echoing down the block like a coordinated protest. No one had organized it officially. No messages, no countdowns. Just a shared understanding. If the rules were clear and fair now, there was nothing to fear. People stepped outside with confidence instead of anxiety. I joined in, rolling my snowblower out with a grin. This time, no one filmed in anger. No one shouted. A few neighbors waved as snow arced into neat piles. Someone laughed when 2 machines backfired at the same time. It felt less like rebellion and more like celebration. The HOA stayed silent. No emails. No texts. No clipboard appearances. The board had learned something valuable and painful. Enforcement without trust creates resistance. Rules without empathy collapse under pressure. They were watching, surely, but they weren't interfering. Later that day, the community page filled with photos. Clean driveways. Kids building snowmen. A caption under one post read, "Turns out mornings aren't the problem." Dozens of likes followed. What surprised me most was how the energy lingered beyond winter. People started talking more. Not just about rules, but about repairs, safety, shared projects. A neglected park got cleaned up. A neighbor organized a tool sharing group. Small things, but meaningful. Power had shifted from a boardroom to the block itself. Mr. Collins eventually stepped down in the spring. No announcement. No farewell email. Just a quiet update on the portal. A replacement was elected unanimously, someone known for listening more than talking. Every now and then, a new resident asks about the snowblower thing. It's already becoming a story, slightly exaggerated with each telling. I don't correct much. Stories are how communities remember lessons. I still keep that original HOA notice in a drawer. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder. Words matter. Silence matters. And sometimes, the loudest change starts at exactly 5 in the morning. By summer, the Snowblower incident had taken on a strange afterlife. It wasn't just a story anymore, it had become a reference point. Whenever a new rule was proposed, someone would inevitably ask, is this another Snowblower situation? The question alone was enough to slow things down. People read drafts carefully now. Words were debated. Assumptions challenged. That single morning had permanently changed how authority was questioned. The new HOA board operated differently. Meetings were shorter. Emails were clearer. Fines dropped sharply. Transparency reports were posted monthly, something no one had even known to ask for before. It wasn't perfect, but it was human. And that made all the difference. I noticed the change most in small moments. A neighbor knocked on my door to ask about a fence instead of reporting it. Another asked permission before trimming a shared hedge. Conflicts didn't disappear, but they softened. Conversations replaced warnings. It felt like living among people again, not policies. One evening, the temporary committee released a full review of past enforcement. The numbers were staggering. Hundreds of fines issued inconsistently. Warnings given selectively. Entire rules enforced only when convenient. Seeing it laid out was uncomfortable, but necessary. The board issued a formal apology to the community. Not everyone accepted it, but it mattered that it happened at all. I stayed out of the spotlight. That was intentional. Movements fail when they become about one person. This had worked because it became about everyone. I just happened to be standing in the snow when the crack formed. Near the end of summer, a new family moved in across the street. During introductions, they asked if the HOA was strict. I paused, then said, it depends. But people pay attention now. That felt honest. The first autumn storm arrived quietly, rain instead of snow, but old instincts kicked in. I checked the rules without thinking. Quiet hours. Clear language. Fair enforcement. It was still there, holding. On the anniversary of that morning, someone posted the original notice in the group chat with a simple caption, "Remember this." Dozens of reactions followed. Laughing faces. Snowflake emojis. One comment stood out. "This is when we stopped being afraid." That line stuck with me. Rules are supposed to serve people, not the other way around. When they don't, pressure builds. Sometimes it explodes. Sometimes it hums to life at dawn and refuses to be ignored. Either way, change doesn't ask permission. Winter would come again. It always does. But now, when the snow falls, it doesn't feel like a threat. Just weather. And that's how it should be. Winter returned with quiet inevitability. This time, there was no tension, no fear, and no surprise. The snow fell in heavy flakes, coating rooftops, streets, and cars, but the energy of that fateful morning seemed embedded in the air itself. I woke before sunrise, as I always did during storms, and looked out my window. This neighborhood was ready. I didn't need to start a battle. We had already won it together. By 5 a.m., I stepped outside, not with defiance this time, but with routine. Down the street, lights flicked on, engines hummed to life, and snowblowers roared in harmony rather than rebellion. The scene was surreal, neighbors clearing driveways, kids bundled in jackets making paths, a few dogs barking as if approving the order. The chaos of that first morning had transformed into rhythm, a dance of preparation and respect. It was a neighborhood fully awake, fully alive. As I cleared my driveway, I noticed faces at windows watchful, but not angry. People waved as I passed. One neighbor even shouted, "Nice work," across the street. The snow wasn't a threat anymore, it was a shared responsibility. No one was policing, no one was judging. The morning air was cold but full of an unexpected warmth. By mid-morning, the communal feeling spread. Group texts filled with photos, jokes, and updates. One elderly neighbor posted a picture of a tiny snowman placed on a cleared sidewalk with the caption, "Our morning hero." Another shared a video of synchronized snowblowers moving down the street, like a mechanical parade. The pride in ownership, in fairness, in having a voice that mattered, this was far more valuable than any rule could dictate. Reflecting on everything that had happened, I realized it wasn't just about a snowblower or a rule. It was about courage. The courage to act, the courage to question, the courage to enforce fairness in a system that often thrives on fear. It had started with one small act, just me deciding to plow at 5 a.m., and rippled outward, transforming habits, minds, and the culture of our neighborhood. By the afternoon, the sun melted parts of the freshly cleared paths, casting glittering reflections on the snow. I stood on my porch, coffee in hand, watching the quiet industry of the community. There were no complaints, no emails, no threats, just life returning to a rhythm that made sense. People had learned that rules serve best when they respect reality, and authority serves best when it listens. And in that moment, I knew something powerful. One act of determination, grounded in reason and persistence, could shift the balance for everyone. Winter storms would continue to come, rules would continue to be written, but the neighborhood now had a backbone. The snowblower morning wasn't just a story, it was a lesson etched into every driveway, every conversation, and every shared smile in the community. The quiet satisfaction of victory lingered. And for the first time, winter felt like home.
If you enjoyed the, don't forget to subscribe to Karen Universe, share with your friends and drop your thoughts in the comments.